Hello everyone, Dr. Suriani. Here we go again. I did send everybody an email. I did make some notes in Blackboard for this lecture and all your assignments. For this lecture, we're going to cover chapters 10 and 11, which include felony crimes against property and people. As I said in my opening lecture for the beginning of class, there will be a few weeks to where we have to combine chapters because we just don't have enough time. So in order to cover them, make sure you take both quizzes, chapter 10 and 11. Make sure you submit both writing assignments, chapters 10 and 11. And as far as the lecture, because this lecture is in two parts, you still have to go in and answer the chapter 10 part, which is felony crimes against property, and then go ahead and answer the chapter 11 part, felony crimes against people. The same link will be in both folders. You'll still have to go in and do separate discussions, one for chapter 10, one for 11. Just make sure you get that done this week, very important. Okay, so let's get going. Introduction. Felony crimes are more serious offenses, so take special care to process these crimes in a professional manner. This is straight out of your book. I would say it depends upon how the victim feels. To them, any crime or any incident is serious. Nevertheless, according to your text, this is something they wanted to highlight. But I would offer that all crimes are serious. There are numerous types of crimes against property and people defined by appropriate state statutes. And we'll cover that here in a moment. But it depends upon where you work as to what statutes are used or what codes, what ordinances. It's truly all semantics because it depends upon where you work. The statute for retail theft is going to be obviously different from Tennessee to Georgia. The names, definitions, and statutes, as we just mentioned, vary from state to state. So, a felony crime against property is usually an offense that is associated with a financial loss to the victim. It's always about money, and we'll cover that here in a second. Ensure that the elements of the crime you are investigating coincide with your jurisdiction's statutory definitions. I guess that's enough said there. Just like misdemeanor offenses, again it's very similar, which we covered last week. A felony crime against property is usually, I say usually, an offense that is associated with a financial loss to the victim. Ensure that the elements of the crime you are investigating coincide. Again, it's repetitive, but it's very important. Just because you're learning certain statutes and certain information about Georgia here doesn't mean that you won't be working in North Carolina, Tennessee, or Washington State someday. You never know. Or federally, for that matter. Felony property crimes. Some typical felony property offenses are theft, criminal mischief, vandalism. If you paid attention to last week's lecture, you see that these are very similar, if not identical. Damage to private property, motor vehicle theft, burglary. But they all have a common denominator. The writing style of felony crimes involving property is basically the same as the style for misdemeanor crimes. And there's a facet that changes it. Obviously the code or the statute is going to have a different subsection, maybe it's A or B. But the statute or code, depending upon your jurisdiction, will be the same. But there's one exception. The monetary value. In some states, the monetary value may be $300 for a theft to be a felony. In some states, it's $500. It depends. But it all comes down to what the item or items are worth. Always consult your appropriate state statute. of course. The dollar amount designates which crimes are misdemeanors and what are felonies. Yep. For example, a person convicted of a violation of Georgia Code Section 16.8.2 through 16.8.9 shall be punished for a misdemeanor, except if the property, which was the subject of the theft, exceeds $500 in value. Now, you know that I was a police officer for almost 30 years in Florida, and in Florida, it's $300. So you need to know where you are and what you're enforcing. But always have your Bible, your criminal law book. That's what we used to call it, the Bible, because everything you need to know is in there. You want to get specifics from the victim regarding the missing property. The property continuation or inventory sheet is very relevant. You want to get certain specifics from the victim, such as what? That might have been confusing. And I ask that you ask for serial numbers. What serial numbers were part of the product or the item? What identifying marks or distinguishing features? For example, some people will get an etcher and they'll etch a code or numbers into all their property and record it. I used to love having them, because when I went to the pawn shop to look and see if things were pawned and there was a drill or a TV, I just looked on the back and there was my code. Gotcha. People take photos of missing items. It's a real good practice to tell people, and actually I'm a couple of years late on doing this for my own home, is get your video camera, or now with your phone, you can walk around your home, video the outside, video the inside, get close-ups of serial numbers, and then just save that video in a file. And, well, for two purposes. In case you have a major theft, or what if you have a fire for loss? You have a record of everything. So educate yourself, but also educate the people that you're responding to and trying to help them. Hopefully they have receipts. Felony property crimes continued. The more you establish uniqueness about the missing items, the better the chances of recovery. Some things are just so outlandishly weird that they're pretty easy to find, kind of like that giant big wheel on top, and some things are just kind of weird. But what about that ring with 2 buttons? I would probably venture a guess that there's not too many of those out there. Moving on, if the victim has no specifics, now is the time, as we mentioned, to educate them on the importance of recording serial numbers, keeping receipts, and photographing high-dollar property. It makes their life easier because you can help them being the victim, recover their items or help them with their insurance company. You can document it very well, and their insurance company will replace their items. Okay, now we're moving on. That was Chapter 10. Now we're moving on to Chapter 11. Please take note of this, because as I mentioned in the beginning of this lecture, you need to differentiate them when you're submitting your lectures and your discussions. Okay, assaults. Assaults are very common events, and the principles involved in completing these types of reports are applicable in most other crimes against persons incidents. Very simple. On assault, well, I don't want to spill the beans. Assault v. battery. Each state has its own specific definition of what elements constitute the crime of assault. In some areas, assault is battery. If you know what I'm saying, is that the unlawful touching for me in the state of Florida is battery, where in some jurisdictions the unlawful touching is assault. For me, I see assault as the intent to cause harm, but not the actual touching. You see what I'm saying? It depends upon where you work. It's very important to differentiate. An intentional act using force or threat of force to injure or harm another person. That could be battery or assault, depending upon where it is you work. The offense classification is determined by the severity of the incident. Like it could be aggravated battery or aggravated assault, thus making it a misdemeanor to a felony. Of course, there are some exceptions, such as battery on the elderly. Any person over 65 could be a felony. Even if you were to just shove them out of the way, it's still felony battery. It depends upon your jurisdiction. So know the difference of assault v. battery. The right way to write. As a cop, as a law enforcement professional, it is your responsibility to ensure that you document the severity of the injury in your case report correctly, in accordance with state statute where the crime occurred. I think I covered this before, but it bears repeating. If you're responding, say, to a battery, and you get there and it's a clear battery that took place, unlawful touching or assault, and you notice injuries, say someone's got a abrasion on the side of their head or wherever, and you make an arrest, follow it up, because that little minor abrasion that you see, if it's a hard hit, may swell up to a swollen shut black eye through tomorrow. So get follow-up pictures and write a supplement that you actually went back to the house or the apartment and documented it. Yep, they are serious events, but as I said, I feel that all crimes are serious. If you hear any noise outside the door, I can't control that. I did put a note out that said that I'm recording, but sometimes people walk by and just don't see it, so I apologize. Take the time to do things right. Do things right the first time. These types of cases can be prosecuted in both criminal and civil court. So it's not your responsibility to focus on the civil end. Do the criminal end, because quite often you won't testify in a civil case. If someone were to batter someone else, they may sue them, but that's normally not something you're going to get involved with. Your supervisor will be closely reviewing these types of case reports, as they will all reports. I guarantee you, even a barking dog complaint, if you don't document it correctly, you'll get it sent back to you and told to make edits or redo it possibly. Research your state statute book to determine the specific elements of the crime. Make sure you know that book. And every year, you're going to get a new book. So what I used to do is take that book every year, go through, highlight it, put little tabs in there of sections that I know that really focus on my specific duties. For example, if you're a road cop, you know, the traffic codes or statutes, battery, theft, all those areas are very important. If you're a detective, they're important, but you need to know what elements that you can pursue. So you might want to highlight those parts. Document what actions of this incident constitute a violation of state statute. Take the time to document the severity of the offense. Be sure to describe any injury in detail. Take photos. Take a lot of photographs. Photograph at the time of the incident, and as I said, a few days later, sometimes the next day, and get follow-ups. Get follow-up photos. Sometimes you can obtain a doctor's or emergency service reports, and that depends on HIPAA. Some places you can't get them. Often I used to get with the victim and ask them if I could have a copy of it, because obviously they're the victim. HIPAA, it doesn't quantify, so they can actually get that report for their medical records, and you can put that in evidence. Always in caps, have the victim contact you if their injury to the incident required additional treatment. If they go back to the hospital, you need to know that. You need to do a supplement report and document that occurred, and get all the information you can. This may result in the need to increase the severity of charges. It really depends. What if they have a minor battery to their head, and you got pictures, and all of a sudden they start suffering seizures, and they need surgery for bleeding on the brain? Now your simple battery that might have been a misdemeanor is now felony battery, and possibly if someone struck them intentionally, it could be attempted murder. I mean, it's plausible. Probably more than any other type of incident, these cases will be closely scrutinized. by prosecutors, defense lawyers, judges, and your supervisors, your reputation will precede you. Do a thorough job. Do the job right the first time. Not only does it affect you and your career, but you swore an oath to protect those who you serve. And the victims in this case, these cases deserve that you do a very thorough report and investigation. Okay, so I like to focus on domestic violence cases because you're going to go and respond to those as a patrol officer, unfortunately, all the time. So I found this video. I thought they did a good job that covered domestic violence cases. It also highlights a domestic violence detective and how she follows up. So let's play this. Just give it a few moments. And a few moments. I apologize. I'm at the mercy of the server. Just give it a moment, folks. It's opening. Goodness gracious. Perhaps all the gerbils aren't spinning their wheels here at the Blairsville campus yet. There we go. There. Okay, it's starting.
It had never happened before. He had been emotionally and verbally abusive, and I had left him, and I had gained quite some independence from him and had got my own place and was working 40 plus hours a week. I was going to school full-time in college and really just trying to make it on my own. And I guess that he felt if he couldn't have me that nobody would. He followed me into my house, and then when I turned around, he was behind me and he started to beat me.
My name is Detective Jackie Smith. I am a domestic violence detective and I work at the Sully District Station. Well, the domestic violence unit consists of 8 detectives. We have 8 stations within Fairfax County, so each station has one domestic violence detective. We follow up on the cases as best we can. We try to support the victims. When an officer responds to a domestic violence call, makes an arrest, typically they don't have contact with that victim until court, which is about 6 weeks later. So we try to be that contact with the victim to give them information if they need about court, if they have any kind of questions, what should I do, what's going to be happening, and we can kind of guide them with that. We're also there to support the officers by gaining evidence, if we can get pictures of bruises that have developed, if we can get phone records, if we can get email records, anything like that to show a pattern of abuse or to help support the case that the officer is taking to court. We're trying to focus on prosecuting a perpetrator without the victim's cooperation if they're too scared to come forward. So we're encouraging officers to get more information from abusers, to get the basic elements to establish a crime. So when a victim comes to court and they're too scared to talk and they're too scared to report it, and they're too scared to follow through, that we're still there to support them. We're still there to hold the abuser accountable for his actions. Perhaps we'll end the cycle there. Well, domestic violence is, in a nutshell, it's physical abuse against a family or household member. So that could be someone's spouse, someone's former spouse. It could be someone that you have a child in common with. It could be someone that you're currently living with or have lived with in the past 12 months. Or it can be a brother or sister, a parent, child, grandparent, or even in-laws that you currently reside with.
That's when the controlling behavior started. I didn't recognize it for what it was at that time. And when I confronted him, he would feign ignorance, like make me feel like I was crazy. Like, what are you talking about? You know, I wouldn't touch your stuff. Like, what do you, you're crazy. I wouldn't do that. And then I would really start to think, well, maybe I am crazy. Maybe, what's going on here? Because he was just that good. He was charming and manipulative and just had all the characteristics of, he could sell anybody anything. He would just make you believe, anything that he wanted you to believe.
Well, some people don't realize when they are being emotionally abused that that is domestic violence. It really is. If someone is constantly being put down, being called stupid, being called names, being called crazy, if someone's yelling at you and threatening you, under the Family Abuse Code, that fits into the definition. So if you don't feel safe and you've never been assaulted and you're not really sure if a protective order is appropriate or if you should call the police, if you're being threatened on a daily basis and you're being put down emotionally, and even sexually. This sexual abuse is another, unfortunately, a big thing that people don't report. It's very underreported because they feel like this is my spouse and it's not rape or it's not sexual abuse, and it is. If it's unwanted, it's rape. If it's unwanted sexual touching, it's against the law. And we encourage people to report that as well. Well, there's really no typical victim of an abuse, but if you could kind of throw it into a category, it would be someone that perhaps has been just beat down mentally by their abuser, someone that feels responsible for their actions. The abuser is going to fit more into a category of someone that maybe grew up in an abusive household, someone that feels that physical abuse is a problem solver, someone that is a master manipulator, not only with their victim, but with the police and with neighbors and friends, and just basically controlling that person in every aspect of their life.
He controlled the way that I dressed. He isolated me from my family. He was much older than I was, and he would tell me things like, you know, your family doesn't care about you. You know, he would say things like, you know, you're a mother now, you can't wear sleeveless shirts, you can't wear your hair down. And I didn't know at the time that that was controlling. I just thought that it was because he cared, and it was more like he was being more like a father figure than a partner. So I just kept feeling like doors were being shut in my face. And then somebody had mentioned to me there was a county attorney who deals with protective orders and domestic violence victims. And I made an appointment to meet with her. And when I met with her, this is the best thing that I ever did.
Well, at one time, you could only get a protective order if you were in a family or household member, be it the spouse, the ex-spouse, the child in common, or cohabitating together. But as of July 1st, 2011, they expanded that to allow anyone to apply for a protective order. So I think their focus in allowing that was to protect dating relationships. Basically, you don't have a child in common, you don't live together, but you have that intimate relationship, but just not defined in the code. So they wanted to protect people in dating relationships, but it also applies to anyone. If you have where you're scared of a coworker, you're scared of a neighbor, but you still have to have that fear. That has to be there, that fear or that of imminent assault or imminent any kind of physical abuse. It still has to be there, but now anyone can apply for a protective order, whether it be in General District Court or in Juvenile Domestic Relations Court. Well, a good time to call the police is really when you don't feel safe anymore. I get that call a lot of times because people feel like they shouldn't be calling unless something substantial happened. They feel like, well, I don't want to call, I don't want to waste their time. The police will come anytime you call. If you're having a fight with your abuser and it hasn't reached that point, we would much rather be there and calm things down before any assault happens. So we always encourage people to call police if you don't feel safe, if you feel like an assault is imminent, and hopefully we'll be there to resolve the situation, maybe get the parties separated if possible, so that nobody does get hurt.
I don't think that he ever recognized that anything that he did was harmful or wrong in any way to me or to possibly any other woman before me, that he probably did the same thing to.
Well, it's definitely very hard to break the cycle and empower a woman with the little bit of time that we get to spend with them, unfortunately. If you think about what an abuser is doing, constantly manipulating them, constantly making them feel less of a person, and then we're talking to them maybe 2 or 3 times before court. But in that brief time, we try to give them other resources, perhaps counseling that is long-term counseling that's going to make them feel better about themselves. We try to involve other family to support them and let them know that this is not their fault, that nothing they did caused this assault or caused this abuse or any of that, and just explain to them that, you know, while this guy might be telling you that, and I use that term generically, guy, girl, whichever the situation may be, while this abuser is telling you that they love you, we try to explain that they might love you, but it's an unhealthy love. This is not safe for you, this is not safe for your children, and nobody deserves to be treated like that. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their home.
I don't think you ever really get over it. I think you learn to cope and you become a survivor. and you learn you do one of two things. You can either wallow in it and live in it and continue to let it control you, or for me, I turned around and I tried to invest my time and my energy back into other women who have gone through similar things that I've gone through, and help them become empowered and let them know it doesn't matter if you work at McDonald's, it doesn't matter if you work, in a church, it doesn't matter if you work for the federal government, it doesn't matter if you're on food stamps, you're only there for a little bit. You can grow, and you can go to school, and you can become educated, and you can work, and you can raise your children by yourself, and you can get out of this situation.
Okay. It was very informative. So let's get back to the lecture. Hopefully. There we go. Okay. So I like to do a final thought, and I know a lot of you worked hard in your critical thinking papers, and they were done well, and I really appreciate it. But 5 seconds of awkward can save you from a lifetime of regret. You have to be you. And I saw a lot of what you shared, if you will, in some of you in your critical thinking papers, and I appreciate that. Again, no, I didn't share with anybody else, but your stories, it made me feel like I was there, and I really appreciate it. You guys did a great job, guys and girls. So I appreciate it. Just be yourself, folks. If you have any questions, as usual, you know how to get a hold of me. Please make sure that you follow the instructions this week because, again, chapters 10 and 11. All right. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week. All right. See you later.